A lease is an agreement, fundamentally. It's an agreement between a landlord and a tenant to rent a residential unit. They're often used interchangeably. A lease is usually referred to in the context of a written document, something that's written. Oftentimes it's a fixed term, so there's a set beginning date and a set end date to the agreement. That's usually what we refer to as a lease. Although the legislation in Ontario doesn't refer to a lease, that's what we usually understand by a lease. But the broader umbrella is a tenancy agreement. And a tenancy agreement can be oral, a tenancy agreement can be written, and a written tenancy agreement, more often than not, will be a lease. So you have an oral, you have written, but it also can be implied. There are a lot of different things that tenants should be looking for in a lease. The first thing is, and it might seem very simple, is the name of the landlord. And that's very important because there might come a time in the tenancy when a tenant will have to give a notice or might have to communicate formally with their landlord. The rent, the actual rent that they are going to be responsible for paying every month and making sure that they have the money to afford that rent. Tenants should be looking for any additional fees that the landlord might be slipping into the lease. And oftentimes these leases are size 8 font, so it's very hard to look at it. So you have to kind of go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but look for those additional fees. The other thing to be worried about really is discounted rent. That is very much of a concern because oftentimes in the lease there will be a provision that the landlord can take away that discount at any time without barely any notice to the tenant. And I would advise tenants to be looking at perhaps negotiating a fixed lease without any discount, even if it's a little bit higher than the discounted rent, because at least they have the certainty that they'll be able to know exactly how much their rent is month after month after month. Anything that is not inconsistent with the Act, which is the Residential Tenancies Act, can be included in a lease. Oftentimes a landlord will try to put a no pet provision in the lease. The Act says very clearly that those types of provisions are void. Other things that might be put in the lease are, for example, requirement to pay rent through prepaid check or through pre-authorized debit agreements. Those are explicitly not allowed. The landlord cannot require a tenant to pay rent through prepaid check or through pre-authorized debit agreements. This is a very difficult situation to deal with because tenants, especially vulnerable tenants, are caught in a difficult position, whether to object to some of these provisions and risk not being able to move into that unit. It's always advisable to seek out legal advice. Obviously, vulnerable tenants, low-income tenants can contact our legal clinic and we can look over a lease for them to kind of make sure that they know some of the issues that might be apparent in their lease. Try to work things out, if at all possible, with your landlord, because after all, this is the person that is going to be responsible for a lot of things during your tenancy.